What you're about to witness defies every instinct we know about wild predators and human survival. A Florida panther, one of the most elusive and dangerous cats in North America, made a choice that left wildlife experts speechless. When floodwaters threatened everything, the impossible became reality, and the bond that formed changed two lives forever. The morning of August 15th started like any other for Maria Vasquez at her remote cabin in the Big Cypress National Preserve. Steam rose from her coffee mug as she sat on the weathered porch, watching the sun paint the wetlands in shades of gold and amber. 22 years of military service had taught her to appreciate these quiet moments before the day began. The rhythmic chorus of cicadas and the distant splash of a great blue heron were the only sounds breaking the peaceful silence of the Florida wilderness. Maria had chosen this isolated life deliberately after retiring from the Army Corps of Engineers 3 years ago. Her cabin sat on a small elevation overlooking thousands of acres of sawgrass marshes and cypress swamps, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that disappeared underwater during heavy rains. The solitude suited her. After decades of commanding bridge construction teams in conflict zones across 3 continents, the predictable routine of sunrise coffee, equipment maintenance, and afternoon fishing provided the healing she needed. Her weather radio crackled to life with the familiar automated voice of the National Weather Service. Hurricane Dolores had intensified overnight, now a Category 3 storm churning towards southwest Florida. The storm surge predictions made her stomach tighten. Living this close to sea level meant evacuation orders would come soon, but Maria had weathered storms before. Her military engineering background had guided every aspect of her cabin's construction, from the reinforced foundation to the emergency supplies cached in waterproof containers. She walked to the eastern window, binoculars in hand, scanning the horizon where dark clouds were already gathering like an advancing army. The wind had shifted, carrying the metallic scent of distant rain and the restless energy that always preceded major weather events. In the growing light, she could see how unusually quiet the wildlife had become. No birds called from the cypress canopy, no alligators basked on the distant hammocks, even the ever-present mosquitoes seemed to have vanished. The silence felt ominous, pregnant with the promise of destruction that was still hours away, but already casting its shadow across the vast wetlands that had become her sanctuary. By noon, the first bands of rain began lashing against the cabin windows with increasing fury. Maria had spent the morning securing equipment and checking her emergency communications when the evacuation order finally came through on her ham radio. The county sheriff's department was coordinating rescues, but her location put her at the bottom of the priority list. She had maybe 4 hours before the roads became completely impassable. As she loaded essential supplies into her military surplus truck, something caught her peripheral vision. Movement in the tree line, but not the chaotic flutter of birds seeking shelter. This was different, deliberate. A shadow that seemed too large and moved with a fluid grace that made her freeze mid-step. The rain had intensified, creating a gray curtain that obscured details, but Maria's trained eye caught the unmistakable silhouette slipping between the palm fronds. Her breath caught. In 22 years of military service across some of the world's most remote locations, she had learned to trust her instincts about dangerous situations. Every nerve in her body was now screaming that she was being watched. She reached slowly for the binoculars hanging around her neck, never taking her eyes off the spot where she'd seen the movement. The rain made observation difficult, but through the lenses, she could make out a tawny form moving with purposeful determination through the underbrush. Not a deer, not a wild boar. The way it moved, low and predatory with muscles rippling beneath wet fur, sent recognition flooding through her consciousness. A Florida panther, one of fewer than 200 left in the wild and one of the most elusive predators in North America. In all her years living in Big Cypress, she had never seen one, though she'd found their tracks near the creek and heard their distinctive screams echoing through the swamp on moonless nights. But this panther wasn't behaving like the ghost-like creatures described in wildlife documentaries. Instead, it was moving closer. The animal paused at the edge of the clearing, amber eyes fixed directly at Maria through the driving rain. The distance between them was maybe 60 yards, close enough for Maria to see the panther's flanks heaving with labored breathing. Something was wrong. Panthers didn't expose themselves like this, didn't linger in open spaces where they could be seen. They were creatures of shadows and silence, apex predators that avoided human contact at all costs. The panther remained motionless for what felt like an eternity, rain streaming off its powerful frame. Maria found herself locked in a staring contest with one of nature's most efficient killers, her military training warring with an inexplicable feeling that this encounter was anything but random. The animal's posture wasn't aggressive. There was no flattened ears, no bared teeth, no low crouch that preceded an attack. Instead, the panther's amber eyes held something Maria had never expected to see in a wild predator: desperation. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, the panther began to move again, not toward Maria, but parallel to the cabin, stopping every few steps to look back. The behavior was so deliberate, so clearly communicative, that Maria felt her heart rate spike. In her years of military service, she had worked alongside bomb detection dogs and search and rescue teams. She recognized this behavior. The panther was trying to lead her somewhere. Against every survival instinct screaming in her head, Maria took a tentative step forward. The panther immediately stopped and turned, ears pricked forward, waiting. When Maria hesitated, the great cat moved closer, reducing the distance between them to 40 yards, close enough that Maria could see the individual whiskers on its muzzle, the pink interior of its mouth as it panted, and the intelligent calculation in those wild eyes. The wind gusted violently, bending the saw palmetto and cypress trees almost horizontal. Hurricane Dolores was arriving ahead of schedule, and the storm surge would follow within hours. Maria knew she should be in her truck, racing toward higher ground in safety. Every protocol she had learned about surviving in dangerous territory told her to retreat immediately from this apex predator. But something deeper than training held her in place. The panther took another step closer, then sat down. In the pouring rain, with a hurricane bearing down on them both, this wild animal had chosen to make itself vulnerable in front of a human. The message was unmistakable, even across species boundaries. Maria made a decision that would have horrified her commanding officers, but felt absolutely right in her gut. She began walking toward the panther, one careful step at a time. The great cat watched her approach without retreating, its tail twitching with what looked almost like relief. When Maria was close enough to see the individual whiskers on its muzzle, the panther stood and began walking toward the deeper swamp. It was leading her into the heart of the storm, and somehow Maria knew she had to follow. The panther led Maria through increasingly treacherous terrain as the hurricane's outer bands hammered the swampland with devastating force. Water was already ankle-deep in areas that had been dry that morning, and Maria could hear the ominous roar of rising water in the distance. Her military boots splashed through muddy pools as she followed the cat deeper into a maze of cypress knees and tangled mangrove roots. After 20 minutes of difficult navigation, the panther stopped abruptly beside a massive fallen cypress tree. The ancient giant had toppled recently, probably during the previous night's winds, creating a natural dam across a small creek. But it was what lay trapped beneath the enormous trunk that made Maria's blood run cold. 2 panther kittens, barely 3 months old, were pinned under a section of the tree where the trunk had split. The smaller kitten was completely submerged except for its nose, which it was desperately keeping above the rapidly rising water. The larger one was trapped by its hindquarters, crying out in high-pitched mewls that cut through the storm's howling like knife blades through Maria's heart. The mother panther approached the kittens and began pacing frantically, her powerful paws testing different angles around the enormous trunk. She clawed at the bark, tried to dig beneath the wood, even attempted to bite through the solid cypress. Nothing worked. The tree was easily 4 feet in diameter and waterlogged from decades in the swamp. It would take heavy machinery to move it, and the rising floodwater gave them minutes, not hours. Maria assessed the situation with the analytical mind that had saved countless lives during her military engineering career. The tree had fallen at an angle, creating a fulcrum point where leverage might be possible. But even with her construction experience, she knew this was beyond what one person could accomplish alone. The kittens needed immediate extraction, or they would drown within the next 30 minutes as Hurricane Dolores pushed the storm surge inland. The mother panther looked up at Maria with eyes that conveyed more desperation than any human expression she had ever witnessed. Here was a creature capable of taking down a 200-pound deer, rendered completely helpless by circumstances beyond her control. The great cat had led Maria here, knowing that humans possessed tools and capabilities that raw strength could not provide. Time was running out. Floodwater was rising by the inch, and 2 innocent lives hung in the balance. Maria reached for her radio, knowing her next call would change everything. Maria's fingers flew across her radio dial, reaching the emergency frequency she had memorized from her military days. Mayday, Mayday, this is Maria Vasquez at coordinates 25.7617 north, 81.3792 west. I have a wildlife emergency requiring immediate assistance with heavy rescue equipment. The crackling response came from Jake Morrison, a park ranger she had met during community preparedness meetings. "Jaria, are you insane? There's a Category 3 hurricane making landfall in 2 hours. We're pulling all rescue teams to safe zones." "Jake, I need a come-along winch and chainsaw. 2 panther kittens are trapped under a fallen cypress, and they'll drown before the main storm hits." The silence on the radio stretched long enough that Maria wondered if she had lost the connection. "Did you say panther kittens? Maria, those cats are federally protected. If there's any chance of survival, Fish and Wildlife will want documentation." Jake's voice carried a new urgency. "I'm 20 minutes out with emergency gear, but you need to understand this is a suicide mission in these conditions." While waiting for backup, Maria waded into the rising water and began her own assessment. The smaller kitten was weakening, its tiny head bobbing as exhaustion set in. She used her hands to create a small dam of mud and debris, buying precious inches of breathing room. The mother panther watched every movement, occasionally brushing against Maria's shoulder in what seemed like encouragement. When Jake's airboat roared into the clearing, Maria had never been happier to see another human being. The bearded ranger took one look at the scene and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. He handed Maria a portable winch while setting up his chainsaw to cut through smaller branches blocking their access. "I've never seen anything like this," Jake shouted over the engine noise. "That mother brought you here deliberately. It's like she knew exactly what kind of help she needed." Working together, they rigged a pulley system using the winch and several sturdy cypress trees as anchor points. The mother panther retreated just far enough to give them room to work, but never took her eyes off the rescue operation. Every few minutes, she would approach the trapped kittens, touching their faces with her nose and making soft chuffing sounds. The first kitten came free after 15 minutes of careful leverage work, sputtering and gasping, but alive. The second required Jake to cut through a section of the trunk, his chainsaw screaming against the storm winds as water continued rising around their knees. With both kittens freed from the fallen cypress, the immediate crisis had passed, but Maria quickly realized their problems were far from over. The smaller kitten was hypothermic and barely responsive, while the larger one had suffered what appeared to be a dislocated hip from being pinned under the massive trunk. Hurricane Dolores was now making landfall, and the storm surge was turning the entire preserve into an inland sea.
Jake's airboat could navigate the rising floodwaters, but evacuating a family of wild panthers presented challenges neither of them had ever faced. The mother panther seemed to understand that her kittens needed continued help, but her wild instincts made her pace nervously as the humans handled her babies. Maria found herself speaking in low, soothing tones, the same voice she had used to calm injured soldiers during her deployments overseas. "We need to get to higher ground," Jake shouted over the howling wind. "My ranger station is on a ridge about 5 miles north. It's built to withstand Category 4 hurricanes, and I've got medical supplies there." The journey through the flooded swampland was harrowing. Maria cradled the Reeker kitten against her chest, feeling its tiny heartbeat flutter against her ribs. The mother panther followed alongside the airboat, swimming powerfully through areas where the water had become too deep for walking. Her dedication was absolute. Even as floating debris struck her and the current threatened to sweep her away, she never fell behind. Jake's ranger station sat on a natural hammock that rose 15 feet above the surrounding wetlands. As they reached the dock, Maria was amazed to see the mother panther leap gracefully onto the wooden platform, shaking the water from her coat with remarkable composure. It was as if she had made a conscious decision to trust these humans completely with her family's survival. Inside the ranger station, Maria set up a makeshift veterinary clinic using Jake's first aid supplies and her own field medical training. The hypothermic kitten required immediate warming, while the injured one needed careful examination to determine the extent of its hip damage. The mother panther positioned herself near the door, alert but calm, watching every procedure with intense focus. As Hurricane Dolores reached its full fury outside, the unlikely family huddled together in the ranger station. Maria worked through the night, monitoring vital signs, administering fluids, and providing the specialized care that meant the difference between life and death for the 2 small patients who had been entrusted to her care. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Hurricane Dolores raged for 18 hours, transforming the Big Cypress landscape into an unrecognizable aquatic wilderness. When the winds finally subsided and the floodwaters began their slow retreat, Maria emerged from the ranger station to survey a completely changed world. Entire sections of forest had been leveled, and the familiar network of trails and landmarks had vanished beneath layers of mud and debris. The panther kittens had survived the night, though their recovery would require weeks of specialized care. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a wildlife veterinarian from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, arrived via helicopter as soon as flying conditions permitted. Her assessment confirmed Maria's field diagnosis. The smaller kitten had pneumonia from near drowning, while the larger one had suffered ligament damage that would require surgery. "These kittens can't return to the wild for at least 2 months, Dr. Rodriguez explained as she prepared transport carriers. "The rehabilitation facility in Gainesville has the equipment and expertise they need for full recovery." Maria felt her chest tighten at the news. After 3 days of round-the-clock care, she had bonded with the tiny creatures in ways she hadn't expected. The mother panther seemed to understand what was happening as the carriers were loaded into the helicopter. She approached Maria one final time, pressing her massive head against her hand in a gesture of unmistakable gratitude. The great cat's amber eyes held an intelligence that transcended species boundaries, conveying messages that needed no translation. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying the kittens toward their medical treatment, the mother panther sat motionless on the dock, watching until the aircraft disappeared into the morning sky. Maria stood beside her, 2 mothers who had fought together against impossible odds to save innocent lives. For the next 8 weeks, Maria's world revolved around tracking a ghost. The mother panther remained in the area, but became increasingly elusive, appearing only as distant glimpses through binoculars or fresh tracks along the creek bed where her kittens had been trapped. 10 weeks after Hurricane Dolores changed everything, Maria received the call she had been waiting for. Dr. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the satellite phone with news that made her heart race. "The kittens are ready for release. Both have made full recoveries, and we'd like to conduct the reintroduction at your location since that's their natal territory." The reunion took place on a crystal-clear December morning that seemed worlds away from the storm-ravaged landscape of 2 months earlier. Nature had begun its healing process, with new green growth emerging from the mud-caked earth and wildlife gradually returning to reclaim their territories. Maria had spent days preparing a soft release site near her cabin, creating a temporary enclosure where the kittens could readjust to their natural environment while remaining safe.
When the transport helicopter landed, Maria scanned the surrounding forest with binoculars, hoping to catch sight of the mother panther. For weeks, she had only glimpsed the great cat in fleeting moments, always watching from a distance but never approaching. Dr. Rodriguez and her team had warned that some mother animals failed to recognize offspring after extended separations, a possibility that kept Maria awake at night. As the carriers were opened, the two kittens emerged as magnificent young panthers, their coats glossy and their movements strong and confident. They immediately began exploring their temporary enclosure, testing their boundaries, and reacquainting themselves with the scents and sounds of their birthplace. But it was what happened next that brought tears to Maria's eyes. A low, chuffing sound echoed from the cypress hammock, followed by the unmistakable response calls of the young panthers. The mother appeared at the tree line like a golden apparition, her amber eyes fixed on the enclosure with laser-like intensity. She approached slowly, her massive paws silent on the leaf litter until she was pressed against the temporary fencing. The recognition was immediate and overwhelming. Mother and offspring touched noses through the mesh, their reunion calls creating a symphony of joy that echoed across the wetlands. Dr. Rodriguez documented every moment, knowing she was witnessing something that would reshape understanding of Panther's social behavior and maternal bonds. 3 days later, when the enclosure gate was finally opened, the Panther family disappeared into the swamp together. But every morning since, Maria has found fresh tracks around her cabin, and sometimes, in the golden light of dawn, she catches sight of amber eyes watching from the shadows, a reminder that some bonds transcend all boundaries.
6 months later, Maria's life had settled into a new rhythm shaped by her extraordinary experience. She had become an unofficial wildlife guardian for the preserve, working closely with conservation teams to monitor the recovering panther population. Her daily walks now included checking the wildlife cameras she had installed throughout the territory, documenting the gradual return of species displaced by the hurricane. On a humid June morning, while reviewing footage from the previous night, Maria discovered something that made her hands tremble with excitement. There, captured in perfect clarity by infrared cameras, was her panther family. But they were no longer just 3. The mother was leading 5 panthers through the moonlit swamp, her 2 rescued kittens, now fully grown, flanking 2 new cubs barely old enough to walk. The footage revealed something even more remarkable. The mother panther had brought her expanded family to drink at the creek directly behind Maria's cabin, the same spot where their desperate journey had begun during Hurricane Dolores. As Maria watched the recording, the mother panther looked directly into the camera, her amber eyes reflecting the infrared light like stars. Maria's story spread through wildlife conservation circles, becoming a beacon of hope for endangered species recovery. She began giving presentations at universities and conservation conferences, always emphasizing that the real heroes were the wild creatures who chose to trust us across the ancient divide between human and animal worlds. The bond she formed that stormy morning continues to ripple outward, inspiring new protection efforts and reminding us that sometimes the most powerful conservation work happens when we simply choose to listen when nature asks for help. What extraordinary wildlife encounters have touched your life? Have you ever experienced that magical moment when the wild world reached out to you? Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear about your own connections with nature's incredible creatures. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing true stories about the unbreakable bonds between humans and wildlife, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest adventures in the natural world.